They say the heart knows long before the mind catches up. Maybe it's the way a man starts leaving the room to answer his phone. Or how he stops meeting your eyes when he says, "I love you." Maybe it's the sudden scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirt, the one he swears is just from work. Whatever it is, the signs come like brushstrokes on a canvas, each one adding to an image you don't want to see. But here's the thing about paintings. No matter how beautiful they are, a single crack can ruin everything. I used to be an artist. Not just the kind who dabbled with a paintbrush in the afternoons when the house was quiet, but the kind whose work hung in galleries, whose name was whispered among collectors. There was a time when I would wake up with ideas bursting in my mind, where color and light were the language I spoke fluently, effortlessly. And then I met Daniel. Tall, charming, with a voice made for television and a confidence that made you want to listen to every word he said. Falling in love with him was easy. Leaving behind my career, my art, everything I had built to raise our daughter, Emma, was a choice I made willingly. And I had no regrets. Until now. It started with the late nights. Daniel always had a demanding schedule. As a well-known television anchor, his job came with long hours and constant attention. I never minded. I knew what I signed up for when I married him. But somewhere along the way, the late nights became more frequent. The texts he used to send me between commercial breaks stopped coming. The way he kissed me when he came home, soft, lingering, like he couldn't believe I was his, turned into a distracted peck on the cheek. I noticed. Of course, I did. But I ignored it. Because ignoring was easier than asking the hard questions. Tonight, the house is quiet. Emma is asleep in her room, clutching the stuffed bunny Daniel bought her for her 3rd birthday. I sit in the garden, barefoot, a canvas on my lap. The twins kick softly inside me, reminding me that they are here, growing, waiting to meet the world. I dip my brush into the blue paint, dragging it across the canvas in slow, deliberate strokes. I paint the sky, the clouds, the world as I want to see it, calm, peaceful, untouched by the storm brewing in my mind. Then I hear the front door open. Daniel's home. Late again. I don't move. I wait. He walks into the kitchen, probably assuming I'm asleep. I listen to the rustle of his keys, the slow exhale as he loosens his tie. Then, the sound I wasn't expecting. His phone vibrates. Once. Twice. 3 times. And then, his voice. Low, quiet. Almost desperate. I told you, I can't talk right now. A pause. No, just wait. Please. Silence. My fingers tighten around the paintbrush, and suddenly, I feel sick. Because I know. I don't have proof. I don't have text messages or lipstick on his collar. But I know. I close my eyes, listening to the wind move through the trees. When I finally open them, I stare at my painting. The sky I had painted is too bright, too perfect. So I do the only thing I can. I take my brush and drag a streak of black through the middle. A crack in the illusion. Just like my marriage. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the nightstand. Daniel had climbed into bed beside me hours ago, his breathing slow and steady, as if nothing was wrong. As if he hadn't whispered into his phone, hadn't hesitated before hanging up. I wanted to turn to him, to ask him, "Who were you talking to?" But the words lodged in my throat like a stone. So I stayed silent. Morning came too quickly. Emma climbed into bed with me before sunrise, her warm little hands pressing against my arm. "Mommy, are you awake?" I turned to her, forcing a smile. "I am now, sweetheart." She giggled and snuggled into me. Daniel was already up. I could hear the shower running in the bathroom. He always had early shoots on Fridays, meaning he'd be gone before I could even find the courage to ask him anything. I held Emma close, inhaling the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and told myself that today would be normal. But it wasn't. By the time I got Emma ready and took her to preschool, Daniel was already at work. The morning news played softly in the background as I poured my coffee, his voice smooth and practiced, filling the kitchen like he was right there with me. I sipped my coffee and watched him. The man on the screen looked like my husband, but he didn't feel like him. He was polished, professional, untouchable. And I was just a woman in her robe, barefoot in her kitchen, carrying his children while I forced myself to stop. I wasn't going to do this. I wasn't going to be that woman, the one who saw ghosts in the corners, who created problems where there weren't any. So instead, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time. I decided to paint. The sun was warm against my back as I set up my easel in the garden. The twins fluttered inside me, a soft, gentle rhythm, as if reminding me they were still there. I lost myself in the colors, the swirl of blue and white as I dragged my brush across the canvas, the way the light danced through the trees. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. Then my phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on my apron and reached for it. A message from my best friend, Claire. Claire, hey, you busy? I glanced at my half-finished painting and typed back. Me, no, what's up? The dots appeared instantly, and then, Claire, I don't know how to say this. But I think you should check online. My stomach tightened. Me, what do you mean? A moment later, Claire sent a link. It was a gossip website. One of those trashy entertainment blogs that covered celebrity scandals, reality TV breakups, and everything in between. I clicked on it. And then, the air left my lungs. Breaking, news anchor Daniel Carter spotted leaving late-night dinner with mystery woman, and they look very close. There was a photo. Daniel. Sitting at a dimly lit restaurant. And beside him, a girl. She looked young. Too young. Her blonde hair spilled over her shoulders, her eyes wide and adoring as she gazed at him. She was leaning in too close, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. The caption beneath the photo twisted my stomach into knots. Sources say Carter and the unidentified woman have been seen together multiple times. Could this be more than just a work dinner? My hands shook. I read the article 3 times, trying to convince myself I was misreading it. That this was just gossip, a lie made up by some bored reporter looking for clicks. But the way she looked at him, the way he looked back at her, it was real. I could feel it in my bones. A lump rose in my throat, thick and heavy. My first instinct was to call Daniel. To demand an explanation. But as I hovered over his number, something stopped me. Would he even tell me the truth? Or would he just lie, like he had been lying all along? I set my phone down, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then I picked up my paintbrush, dipped it in the deepest shade of red, and dragged it across the canvas. Another crack in the illusion. And this time, I wasn't sure I could paint over it. I didn't call Daniel. Not that night. Not the next morning. Instead, I watched. I watched the way he moved around the house, the way he kissed Emma's forehead absent-mindedly before heading to work. I watched the way he avoided my gaze when he told me he had another late meeting that night. I watched the way his phone never left his side anymore, how he turned it over when he placed it on the counter, how his fingers tightened around it when a message came in. And I said nothing. Because I needed to see how far he would take the lie. It was Saturday, one of the rare weekends Daniel didn't have to work. Emma wanted pancakes, so I made them the way she liked, extra fluffy, drowning in syrup, blueberries on the side. She giggled as I made a pancake in the shape of a bunny, clapping her little hands together. Daniel walked into the kitchen, looking as perfect as ever. He kissed my cheek, quick, almost mechanical, before ruffling Emma's hair. "Morning, beautiful," he said to her. Then he glanced at me. "Smells good." I nodded, setting a plate in front of him. "Eat while it's hot." He did. Like everything was fine. Like his face wasn't plastered on a gossip website with another woman. And I let him. I poured myself a cup of coffee, keeping my hands busy, my face neutral. But inside, something burned. I wasn't a fool. I knew how these things went. A man like Daniel, successful, charming, adored by the public, had no shortage of admirers. Women looked at him the way I once did, with awe and admiration. But this girl, whoever she was different. She wasn't just a passing infatuation. I knew at the moment I saw the way he looked at her. Still, I needed to be sure. That night, after Emma was tucked into bed, I sat beside Daniel on the couch. He was watching something on TV, but I wasn't paying attention. I was studying him. The way his fingers drummed against his thigh, the way his jaw tensed when his phone buzzed in his lap. He glanced at it, his shoulders going rigid. Then, without thinking, I spoke. "Who keeps texting you so late?" His head snapped toward me, his expression perfectly neutral. Too neutral. "It's just work." I tilted my head. "On a Saturday night?" He shrugged. "You know how it is. News never stops." I smiled. Sweet. Innocent. "Oh, I do." That's why I looked you up today. He froze. Just for a second. But I saw it. His grip on his phone tightened. What do you mean? I kept my voice light. I saw the article. The one about your dinner with a mystery woman. I let out a soft laugh. You should have told me. Now I have to find out from gossip blogs? He exhaled, shaking his head. It's nothing, Anna. Just rumors. They take a picture of me with a coworker, and suddenly, I'm having an affair? You know how the media works. I nodded, pretending to consider his words. And she's just a coworker? Of course. His voice was smooth, easy. Her name's Rachel. She's an assistant at the station. We were discussing a project. That's all. Rachel. The name sat heavy in my mind. I looked at him, really looked at him. His blue eyes were steady, his expression calm. He was a man trained to be in front of cameras, to control the narrative, to say what needed to be said without giving anything away. And if I hadn't seen the picture, if I didn't know better, I might have believed him. But I wasn't the woman I used to be. I knew a perfect lie when I heard one. I waited until he was asleep. Then I slipped out of bed, my heart pounding, and reached for his phone. It was locked, of course. But Daniel, in all his arrogance, never changed his passcode. It took me 2 tries. And then, my stomach turned. There they were. Messages. Dozens of them. Some deleted, some not. Rachel, I miss you. Rachel, are you awake? Rachel, you're not ignoring me, are you? I scrolled further. My hands trembled as I read the words that changed everything. Daniel, I can't do this tonight. She's suspicious. Rachel, I don't care. I love you. Rachel, I need you. Daniel, Rachel, please. My vision blurred. I closed the messages, my breath coming too fast, too shallow. My whole body felt numb. He had been lying. To me. To our daughter. To our unborn children. And worst of all, he thought I wouldn't find out. I looked down at him, peacefully asleep beside me, unaware that the perfect lie he had built was crumbling. And for the first time since this all began, I knew exactly what I had to do. Daniel didn't notice. Not the way I stared at him the next morning over coffee. Not the way my hands trembled when I folded laundry. Not the way my stomach twisted every time my phone buzzed, knowing there was another message from Claire asking if I was okay. Because I wasn't. I was a woman unraveling, piece by piece, thread by thread. And Daniel? He was still playing his role, the perfect husband, the loving father. Kissing Emma's cheek before leaving for work, smiling at me across the kitchen counter like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. That afternoon, I sat in the garden with my sketch pad, but I couldn't draw. My fingers felt stiff, clumsy. My mind was too tangled with questions. Who was Rachel, really? How long had this been going on? Had he ever planned on telling me the truth? I reached for my phone, my heart hammering. I shouldn't do this. I knew I shouldn't. But I did. I opened Daniel's messages again. Rachel, I need to see you. Daniel, not now. It's complicated. Rachel, because of her? I swallowed, my grip tightening on the phone. Rachel, you love me, don't you? Daniel, you know I do. The words felt like a slap. I forced myself to keep reading. Rachel, then why won't you leave her? Daniel, it's not that simple. Rachel, it is. I love you. And you love me. You said it yourself. I don't want to be a secret anymore. A sharp pain twisted in my chest. She wasn't just some fling. She was in love with him. And worst of all, he didn't shut it down. That night, I stood at the sink, scrubbing a plate so hard my knuckles turned white. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. I froze. His breath was warm against my neck. What's wrong? He murmured. Everything. I forced a laugh, shaking my head. Nothing. Just tired. He turned me to face him, his blue eyes searching mine. You sure? I nodded, plastering on the smile I'd been perfecting for days. Yeah. And just like that, he believed me. Because he wanted to believe me. Because men like Daniel, men who build their lives on lies, always think they're one step ahead. But he wasn't. Not anymore. I waited until he left for work the next morning before I made my next move. I slipped into our bedroom, reached into the back of his closet, and pulled out a shoebox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were things from our early days, old concert tickets, love notes, photos of us before we were us. I pushed past them until I found what I was really looking for. Daniel's work ID. And his office keycard. I clenched them in my fist. If Daniel wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. The thing about betrayal is that it rewires your brain. I used to trust Daniel without question. If he said he had a late meeting, I believed him. If he said he was working overtime, I kissed him goodbye and wished him a good night. Now, every word felt like a puzzle I needed to solve. Every action, a clue. And I was done sitting at home, waiting for answers to come to me. I was going to get them myself. The news station where Daniel worked was only a 20-minute drive from our house. I knew the building well. I had been there dozens of times over the years, bringing him lunch, sitting in the audience for live broadcasts, smiling at his coworkers as they told me how lucky I was to have him. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't coming as Daniel Carter's wife. I was coming as a woman looking for the truth. I parked across the street, gripping his ID and keycard so tightly in my hand that the edges dug into my skin. My stomach was a mess of nerves, but I forced myself out of the car and into the building. A security guard at the front desk gave me a polite nod. "Mrs. Carter. Haven't seen you here in a while." I smiled, keeping my voice casual. "Yeah, I thought I'd surprise Daniel. He left his keycard at home." I held it up as proof. "Mind if I bring it up to him?" The guard didn't even question it. He just waved me through. Daniel's office was on the 7th floor. As I stepped into the elevator, I felt my heart pounding against my ribs. This was a mistake. I shouldn't be here. I should go home, pretend I never saw those messages, ding. The elevator doors slid open. Too late. I stepped into the hallway, my pulse thundering in my ears. The newsroom was buzzing with people, voices overlapping as producers and journalists rushed back and forth, preparing for the next broadcast. I kept my head down and walked quickly, weaving past desks and cameras until I reached his office. The door was closed. And from inside, I heard voices. Daniel's voice. And hers. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle. It wasn't locked. I turned it. Slowly. Quietly. The door opened just a crack, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Rachel. She was sitting on Daniel's desk, her long blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, her legs crossed, her skirt hiked up just a little too high. Daniel stood in front of her, his hands resting on the desk beside her, caging her in. I couldn't hear what they were saying at first. My pulse was too loud, roaring in my ears like a wave crashing over me. Then, "I don't know how much longer I can do this," Rachel whispered. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Rachel, we've talked about this." She shook her head. "No, you talk. You say you love me, but then you go home to her. You sleep in the same bed as her. You kiss her. And I'm just supposed to wait?" Daniel exhaled sharply. "It's complicated." Rachel's voice broke. "It's not. It's me or her, Daniel." I felt like I was going to be sick. But it wasn't until she spoke again that I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "I'm pregnant." I staggered back, my hand flying to my stomach that was already round with his other children. Rachel was pregnant. Rachel. The girl who was barely more than a child herself. The girl who had been texting my husband in the middle of the night, begging him to choose her. And now, she was carrying his baby. Just like I was. The betrayal had been one thing. The affair. The lies. But this was something else entirely. This was war. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember walking back through the office, stepping into the elevator, driving home. All I remember is standing in my garden, the sun setting behind me, my hands gripping the edge of my easel so hard I thought it might break. I stared at the painting I had started a few days ago, one of the sky, peaceful and bright. And without thinking, I grabbed the brush and dragged a thick, black line through the middle of it. The illusion was gone. Everything I had built with Daniel, everything I had sacrificed, everything I had given up, it had all been for nothing. I didn't cry. Not when I left the news station. Not when I sat in my car, staring blankly at the road ahead. Not even when I walked into the house, past Emma's toys scattered across the living room floor, past the framed wedding photos on the wall, the ones where Daniel had held me like I was his whole world. But I felt it. The crack widening inside me, splitting me open like a painting left too long in the sun, its colors fading, its foundation crumbling. I wanted to scream. To throw something. To destroy every trace of him in this house. But I couldn't. Because Emma was here. Because I was still carrying his children. And because the moment I shattered, truly shattered, I didn't know if I'd ever be able to put myself back together. Daniel came home late, as usual. I was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in, pretending to read a book, though I hadn't turned the page in over an hour. He set his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, then smiled at me like nothing had changed. "Hey, babe." I stared at him. At the man I had loved for years. The man I had built a life with. The man who had stood in an office hours ago, looking another woman in the eyes while she told him she was pregnant with his child. And he had said nothing. He hadn't stopped her. Hadn't denied it. Hadn't told her it was a mistake, that he belonged to me, to our family. Instead, he had let her say the words. "It's me or her." And I didn't even know if he had an answer. "Long day?" I asked, my voice smooth. "Careful." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah. Meetings, scripts, a bunch of last-minute changes to tomorrow's segment. You know how it is." "Lie." I nodded. "You must be exhausted." He walked over and kissed the top of my head. "You have no idea." I wanted to laugh. Instead, I turned the page in my book, staring at the words without reading them. I let him go through his routine, kissing Emma goodnight, showering, climbing into bed beside me, like nothing had changed. Like our marriage wasn't already burning to the ground. The next morning, I woke up before him. I made Emma's breakfast, braided her hair, kissed her on the forehead as she ran off to preschool, completely unaware that her father was slowly unraveling our family thread by thread. Then, I picked up my phone. We need to talk." I hesitated for a moment, then hit send. "To Rachel." She responded within minutes. "Rachel, who is this?" You know who this is." Silence. Then, "Rachel, what do you want?" I stared at the screen, my heart thudding against my ribs. I wanted a lot of things. I wanted to turn back time. I wanted to erase the last few months. I wanted to go back to the moment I first fell in love with Daniel and tell myself don't do it. But since none of that was possible, I settled for the next best thing. To meet. Just us. "Rachel, why?" Because if you're carrying my husband's baby, then we need to get a few things straight." Another pause. Then, "Rachel, fine. Name the place." We met at a quiet cafe on the other side of town. Neutral territory. A place where neither of us belonged, where we weren't wife or mistress, just two women sitting across from each other, separated by nothing more than a table and the weight of one man's lies. She was even younger up close. 19, maybe 20, with bright green eyes that held too much emotion for someone who had just torn a marriage apart. But what struck me most wasn't the youth in her face. It was the confidence. She wasn't afraid of me. She wasn't guilty. She was sure. Sure of what? I didn't know. Not yet. She folded her arms. "You wanted to talk. So talk." I studied her for a long moment. "Are you really pregnant?" I asked finally. Her expression flickered. "Yes." "How far along?" "Almost 9 weeks." I inhaled sharply. That meant it hadn't just been a recent mistake. This had been going on for months. I gripped my coffee cup so hard my knuckles turned white. "And you're sure it's Daniel's?" Her jaw tightened. "I'm not some liar trying to trap him. We've been together for almost a year. He loves me." Something in me snapped. I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured. "You really believe that, don't you?" Her eyes narrowed. "He told me he loves me." I smiled, cold and sharp. "And what do you think he tells me?" Rachel flinched. "Good. You think you're special?" I asked. "That you're different from the others? That he's never done this before?" Silence. I leaned forward. "Men like Daniel don't fall in love," I said quietly. "They collect. They take. They use." She shook her head. "No. You're wrong." "Am I?" I tilted my head. "You gave him an ultimatum." "And what did he do?" She didn't answer. I pressed on. "Did he leave? Did he choose you?" Her lip trembled. He needs time." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because I had once been the girl who thought love could fix anything. The girl who thought devotion was enough to change a man like Daniel Carter. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the wife. The mother of his children. The woman who had given up everything for a man who had already made his choice, and it wasn't me. Or her. It was himself. Rachel's hands curled into fists. You don't get to win just because you have a ring on your finger. I met her gaze, calm and unflinching. And you don't get to win just because you have his baby. She sucked in a breath. I stood, sliding a $20 bill onto the table. Let me give you some advice, I said softly. Don't wait for him to save you. He won't. Then, without another word, I walked away. And for the first time in weeks, I felt free. I didn't tell Daniel about my meeting with Rachel. I didn't need to. Because when I walked out of that cafe, I knew something she didn't. Daniel wasn't going to choose me. And he wasn't going to choose her. Men like him never choose. They just wait for the women in their lives to tear each other apart, to fight over them like a prize. But I wasn't going to fight for him. I was going to destroy him. That night, I made dinner like usual. Emma sat at the kitchen counter, swinging her little legs as she chattered about her day at preschool. Daniel sat across from me, scrolling through his phone, too distracted to notice the way I was watching him. Waiting. My heart pounded, but I forced my hands to stay steady as I poured him a glass of wine. This was it. The beginning of the end. He glanced up, smiling. What's this for? I smiled back. I thought we should celebrate. He chuckled, taking a sip. Celebrate what? I tilted my head. Our growing family. He froze. For just a fraction of a second. Then, he recovered, setting his glass down with an easy grin. Of course. The twins. I swirled the wine in my own glass, pretending to think. Oh, and Rachel's baby, too. Daniel went completely still. His knuckles went white against the counter. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. And then, he laughed. Anna, he said, shaking his head. You don't actually believe that, do you? I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the moment. I know it's true, I said simply. Silence. A long, thick silence. And then, where did you hear that? Not that's a lie. Not she's crazy. Not I would never. Where did you hear that? My stomach twisted, but my face stayed calm. I saw the messages, Daniel. I heard her say it myself. His jaw clenched. Anna, I held up a hand. No, don't. Don't insult me with another lie. Not after everything. He exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. It's not what you think. I let out a bitter laugh. Really? Because I think you've been sleeping with a girl half your age, getting her pregnant while your wife, I placed a hand on my stomach, feeling the twins shift, carries your other 2 children. He squeezed his eyes shut. It was a mistake. A mistake. That word nearly made me snap. A mistake was forgetting our anniversary. A mistake was saying the wrong thing in an argument. But this? This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. You need to fix this, Daniel, I said, my voice low, dangerous. You need to figure out what you're going to do. Because I swear to God, I leaned in, eyes burning into his, I will not be the woman who waits around while her husband plays house with a child. I saw panic flicker in his eyes. The realization that I wasn't just mad. I was done. But instead of apologizing, instead of begging for forgiveness, he said the one thing that sealed his fate. I need time. Time. Of course he did. Time to string us both along. Time to keep his perfect life intact while he juggled his new one on the side. But he was out of time. Because while he was busy calculating his next move, I was already planning mine. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling Daniel's presence beside me like a ghost. His breathing was steady, calm, like he hadn't just set our entire marriage on fire. I knew what he was thinking. That I would wait. That I would cry, scream, threaten to leave, but that, in the end, I would stay. Because that's what I had always done. But not this time. This time, I wasn't waiting for him to decide how this ended. This time, I was in control. The next morning, I made a call. Not to a lawyer. Not yet. I called Charlotte. Howard's wife. The other woman who had unknowingly been dragged into this mess. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Hello? I took a slow breath. Hi, Charlotte. This is Anna Carter. A pause. Then, Daniel's wife? That's me. She hesitated. Why are you calling me? I smiled. Because I think we have something in common. Charlotte and I weren't supposed to meet. Women like us, wives of powerful, successful men, weren't supposed to talk. We were supposed to stay in our separate, curated worlds, smiling through the lies, pretending we didn't know what our husbands were doing behind closed doors. But I wasn't pretending anymore. And neither was she. We met at an upscale hotel lounge, the kind of place where the lighting was dim, the drinks were overpriced, and the air was thick with secrets. Charlotte was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner booth, a martini in front of her. She looked like the kind of woman who had spent her entire life knowing how to play the game, poised, elegant, unreadable. But when she looked up and saw me, something in her expression shifted. Not anger. Not resentment. Recognition. I slid into the seat across from her, my pulse steady, my mind sharp. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, "You're smarter than I thought," she said, lifting her glass to her lips. I smirked. "So are you." She took a slow sip of her drink. "So, what's your plan?" I tilted my head. "You assume I have one?" She set her martini down, her red nails clicking against the glass. "A woman doesn't call her husband's mistress's other woman just to chat, Anna. You didn't come here to cry on my shoulder. You came because you're ready to burn it all down." I studied her. She wasn't wrong. "Daniel and Howard think they're untouchable," I said. "They think we'll sit back, let them figure out their mess in their own time. That will wait." She smirked, swirling her drink. "They don't know us very well, do they?" I exhaled, leaning forward. "I want out." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Divorce?" "Maybe," I admitted. "But on my terms. And I want Daniel to lose. I want him to feel it." A slow smile spread across her lips. "Now we're talking." I hesitated for only a second before asking, "What about you?" She let out a quiet laugh. "Oh, Howard's done. He just doesn't know it yet. He's been using my money, my connections to build his little empire. He thinks I won't walk away because I have too much to lose." She tilted her head. "But I have lawyers that would eat him alive." I sat back, impressed. "So why haven't you left yet?" She shrugged. "I like watching him squirm." I laughed, a real laugh, for the first time in weeks. Charlotte leaned in, her expression turning sharp. "Tell me, Anna, how far are you willing to go to make Daniel regret everything?" I didn't hesitate. "As far as it takes." That night, I lay in bed next to Daniel, my heart steady, my mind calculating. He still didn't know what I had done. That I had met Rachel. That I had met Charlotte. That while he was fumbling for a way to keep his double life intact, I was setting the stage for his downfall. Step 1, control the money. The next morning, while Daniel was in the shower, I logged into our joint bank accounts. I had never been the kind of wife who micromanaged our finances. Daniel made the money, I handled the house. That was our arrangement. But now? Now, I was taking back control. With a few quick transfers, I moved the majority of our savings into an account in my name. Not enough to alert him immediately, but enough that when he did notice, it would be too late to stop me. I opened my personal account, the one he had long since forgotten about, and smiled. The balance was growing. Step 2, secure my future. I made 3 phone calls that day. 1 to a lawyer. A damn good one. 1 to a realtor. Because whether I left Daniel now or later, I needed an exit strategy. And 1 to Claire. "Me, I need a favor." "Claire, anything." "Me, if I told you I was about to set fire to my marriage, would you help me pour the gasoline?" There was a pause. "Then, Claire, I'll bring the matches." Step 3, let him dig his own grave. Daniel came home late that night. "Long day?" I asked, watching as he loosened his tie. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah. A lot on my plate right now." "I bet." I walked over, running my hands down his arms, pressing my cheek against his chest. "I don't know what I'd do without you," I murmured. He kissed the top of my head. "I love you, Anna." I smiled against his shirt. "I bet you do." The next day, Charlotte sent me a text. "Charlotte, check your email. You'll love this." I opened my laptop, my breath catching as I saw the subject line. Audio file, Howard and Daniel, private conversation. My hands trembled as I clicked on it. And then, I heard everything. Daniel. Howard. Talking about us. Talking about Rachel. About how they had it under control. About how they knew we wouldn't leave, because what were we without them? I clenched my fists. "Oh, Daniel. You have no idea what's coming. There are moments in life when you realize you've been living in a carefully constructed illusion. I had spent years believing in Daniel, in our marriage, in the life we had built together. I had convinced myself that love was enough. That no matter what challenges came our way, we would find our way back to each other. But sitting there, listening to his voice on that recording, hearing him and Howard mock the very foundation of our lives, I knew there was no coming back from this. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. Charlotte and I met again that afternoon, this time at her penthouse. She poured us both glasses of wine, her expression unreadable as she watched me from across the sleek marble kitchen island. "So," she said, tilting her glass. "How do you want to play this?" I took a sip, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. "Publicly," I said. Charlotte's lips curled into a slow, wicked smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." Step 1. Destroy the career. Daniel had spent years crafting his image as a beloved, trustworthy news anchor. He was respected, admired, untouchable. Until now. I forwarded the recording to an anonymous tip line at one of the biggest media gossip sites. Charlotte had connections at several publications, and with one well-placed call, the recording landed in the hands of someone eager to expose a scandal. By the end of the day, the headline was everywhere: breaking news, prominent TV anchor caught in infidelity scandal, secret pregnancy and shocking private conversations leaked. The article detailed everything: the affair, Rachel's pregnancy, the way Daniel and Howard laughed about keeping their wives in the dark. By the time Daniel got home that night, his phone was ringing non-stop. His name was all over the internet. He stormed through the door, his face pale with rage. "Anna, what the hell is going on?" I set my wine glass down, meeting his gaze calmly. "What do you mean?" He held up his phone. "This. My entire career is," I arched an eyebrow. "Falling apart?" His jaw tightened. "You did this." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "Did I?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. "You don't understand, Anna. This isn't just some gossip piece. This could ruin me." I tilted my head. "Funny. You didn't seem too worried about ruining me." Silence. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing me. The fear of losing everything. Step 2. Take the money. Charlotte had warned me that men like Daniel never saw it coming. "They're so used to controlling everything," she had said, swirling her martini. "They never realize when we take control." While Daniel was busy doing damage control, I was executing my final move. I withdrew half of our savings and secured it in an account he couldn't touch. I finalized the listing on our house, ensuring it would be sold before he even had a chance to protest. And then, I filed for divorce. But I wasn't just asking for a divorce. I was asking for full custody. Daniel came home 3 days later looking wrecked. His eyes were bloodshot, his suit rumpled, his confidence gone. He dropped his briefcase onto the counter, rubbing his temples. "We need to talk." I didn't look up from my book. "About what?" He exhaled sharply. "About us." I flipped a page. "There is no us." "Anna," I turned to him, my expression cool. "Do you love her?" His throat bobbed. Yes or no, Daniel." Silence. And that was my answer. I stood, walking over to him. "You had a choice," I said softly. "You could have chosen me. You could have chosen our family." I reached into the drawer, pulling out a thick envelope, and pressed it against his chest. "But now?" I whispered. "You don't have a choice anymore." His hands shook as he opened the envelope, his face going pale as he saw the divorce papers. His voice broke. "You're serious?" I smiled. "Goodbye, Daniel." Step 3. Walk away. By the end of the week, I had packed up my things and taken Emma to a new place. A fresh start. A life where I didn't have to play the role of the naive, forgiving wife. The media circus around Daniel's scandal didn't die down. His network placed him on indefinite leave. Advertisers pulled out. His once loyal fans turned on him. And Rachel? Well, she learned the hard way that men like Daniel never change. Because as soon as his world started crumbling, he did what all weak men do. He ran. By the time Rachel's baby was born, Daniel was long gone, buried in lawsuits, debt, and public disgrace. And me? I was free. I sat in my new garden one afternoon, a cup of tea in one hand, a paintbrush in the other. Emma was playing nearby, her laughter filling the air. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Whole. I dipped my brush into the deep, rich blue and dragged it across the canvas, filling the sky with color. No more cracks. No more illusions. Just a new beginning. A masterpiece of my own making.